Welcome back. Now we finally get to the good stuff, which is the actual Bible. Um, I'm really excited about this because the thing about the Bible, I guess, that we didn't really discuss in the introduction is the Bible is this weird, strange, intriguing, complicated, in your face, defying expectations sort of document. I really, even if I were not a Christian or even religious, I suspect I would find the Bible extraordinarily intriguing. I haven't always had a fascination with it. Um, I didn't grow up Christian, and so it was something I discovered later, and maybe that has something to do with it, is that I didn't kind of have it around all the time. But it's absolutely a fascinating document, and the more I learn about it, the more I am intrigued by it, both as an academic and then, of course, personally. So let's dig in. So we begin where the Bible begins, and that is with Genesis. Genesis is a Greek word. A number of the Old Testament or Hebrew scripture titles of the books are Greek rather than Hebrew. And so Genesis actually does mean beginning. But one thing I want to note now, and we'll get back to this after we get through Genesis 1 through 11, is that the book of Genesis is 52 chapters, I believe. 50, 51, 52 chapters. And the creation part of the book is 2 chapters. The fall part is chapters 3, through 11. So the rest from 12 on is all about Israel. So it's good to remember that the Bible, the Genesis book, is not as much about the beginnings of everything, although that's extraordinarily important, but the beginnings of Israel, the people of God, the God wrestlers, as we'll talk about. Wondering where I get that from, God wrestlers? Well, stay tuned. So the first thing we need to understand when we're looking at the scriptures and the creation narrative is the very beginning of it, which is, of course, God. In the beginning, God created the heavens, the earth. The earth was formless and void, and the Spirit was hovering over the waters or over the deep. And so, 2 things right off the bat. Now, you probably noticed there are 2 creation stories. They have different details. Some may even seem contradictory, like when were humans created? Were they created before the animals, or were they created after? And that's not really the important thing. This is talking about the creation of the world. So these are 2 different ways of viewing that event, whatever that event means. We need to remember that we're not talking about just your average, everyday sort of things. When it says God made the heavens and the earth, we don't mean make in the same way that we mean the word when we say to make a cake, or to make love, or to make a baby, or to make a face at someone. This is not the normal type. This is a completely unique thing. The word make here means something it never ever means in any other context, because it is creation from nothing. And so the 2 things is that in the 2 creation stories, God is referred to with 2 words. The first one is Elohim, which is Hebrew for God. It's actually in the plural. It literally means gods, but the Hebrews, they didn't, at least especially later on when these books were redacted, they did not believe in many gods. They believed in one God. And so it's actually a plural of majesty, similar to if you talk to, when you have the royal we. So the queen says, "We are going to," and she just means herself, because she's so awesome. So that's the kind of idea. In fact, I think this is still a practice used in Arabic. So I remember one woman telling me in undergrad, she was Arabic, and she referred to her husband as her husbands, plural. So it was this title of respect. Um, and I don't know if they say their wives, his wives. I assume so, but I don't know. The other one though is the word Yahweh, which if you are Jewish, forgive me. In this course, we are going to say the name of God. This is not a practice that is permitted in Jewish teaching. You are not supposed to say the name. This goes back to the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not take my name in vain. But Yahweh is the name of God, and we're going to use it in this class. Now, we're going to talk more when we get to Exodus about what Yahweh means. But for now, don't understand it as a word God, okay? This is not a category of being statement. This is a personal statement. God has a name. And in fact, that name, Yahweh, means I am, or being itself. I am. That is God's name. And so God is a personal being. God is not just in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in this Genesis account, some sort of cosmic force or set of laws. God is a personal being. God has intentions. God has a personality. God has desires, wills things. And so this is very important because God, as we talked about, remember, is transcendent. Then we could just mean probably, or not probably, possibly just a cosmic force. But this is a transcendent being who is also a personal being. A being with a name, a being with an intent, okay? A being with self-awareness. God is in God's counsel, let us make. And so this is very important because remember, what are our absolute attributes? I'll give you a second. So if you don't know them, you should pause and make sure you know them because we're going to keep coming back to them over and over and over again. And that is, God is aseity, being itself. God is simple, not made of parts. Therefore, God is infinite, without end, without boundaries. Therefore, God is eternal. There is no before or after because that would be a boundary. And therefore, God is immutable. God does not change. And so this is important because what we need to understand about creation is that God didn't have to do it. God does not need creation. God does not depend upon creation. God needs nothing. If you are being from itself, aseity, again, aseity, that word being from itself, comes from the Latin ase, from itself. If you are uncaused being from itself, you are in need of nothing. You are, and that is a necessary and conditionless and unchangeable reality. You need nothing if you are God because you are being. So God doesn't create to actualize God's self, to add something to God's self, to make God's self better. God doesn't have to do that. God is fully God's self already. God is fully actualized, which means God is fully free. God is the freest creature of all because God has nothing inhibiting God from fully expressing and acting in accordance with his nature. God is freely God's self, needs nothing, thus becomes nothing. Thus creation is fundamentally a freely willed event. God doesn't have to create. God chooses to create. And why, we ask, why create? Well, there's probably something in the creation that can give us an answer to that, which we're going to continue to suss out. But God doesn't have to make anything. Therefore, creation itself is a gift. It is donated from the Latin donare, which means to give. That's where we get the word donation. Creation is also thus a grace from the Latin gratia, which means gift or grace. They don't have a distinction in those terms necessarily. They can speak of a gift as a donum, a gift in that sense, but a gift also is a grace. It's something unmerited. God didn't have to give. And so when we receive being, when creation receives being from God, it's an unmerited gift. We did nothing to warrant our existence. It's something God just did, and this is what we call prevenient grace. It means the coming before grace. There is a grace beyond salvation that is just the grace of God giving being to anything. We didn't earn it, we don't deserve it, but God gives it freely. And this is important. This is what it means if a transcendent being creates. I'm sorry, there's this shining light here, and I hope that's not too distracting. I'll try to stay out of it. So that is what we need to understand first and foremost. When we read in the beginning God, we need to understand what we mean by the word God. That means transcendent being with the absolute attributes, and then of course the transcendentals. Remember those? Being, truth, unity, goodness, and beauty. That's what we mean by the word God. And we also mean a personal God. This is not just any God. This is not just the category God. This is Yahweh. This is a personal being who freely then chooses to create. Now, did the creation happen in 7 days? I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's actually a much less interesting conversation than people seem to make it out to be. 7 actual literal 24-hour periods. Very few have actually believed this throughout the tradition. First of all, there's some weird things going on. You know, there's light, there's morning and evening on, the before the days that the sun and moon are created. So where is that light coming from and all of that? Hopefully the Noah video that you had in your readings will give you kind of a way of thinking about how evolution could be still kind of contained within the narrative. That's what I believe. I believe it. Science seems to teach evolution. It seems to teach an old universe, 13.8 or 9 billion years or whatever it is now. So evolution is not a new theory, and it's perfectly possible that the 7 days represent epochs, or even, well, in fact, we'll talk about in a moment. That's not even what they're really getting at. But in any case, some did believe that the creation happened over a slow, long period of time. Evolution is a theory that's been around since, not Darwinistic evolution with natural selection and stuff, but Anaximander, I think in like the 5th century BC, was a Greek guy, and he came up with this idea of evolution, that he said that we came out of the sea. And evolved into what we are now. But you know, it's not a matter of dogma. It's not a matter of are you a Bible believer if you think that the 7 days are literal or not. Augustine, someone who pretty much every tradition of Christianity accepts as authoritative and holds up as a great Christian thinker, went through in his commentary on Genesis, you know, was it instantaneous? Did it happen over a long period of time? And he actually says, don't know. And frankly, you know, believe what you want, don't care. So what's more important, though, is what is going on with the 7 days. What we're trying to do is not think about the Bible, again, like a science textbook, or even exactly a history textbook. This is important. 7 days, what does it indicate? Well, if we're thinking theologically, we're thinking narratively, 7 days has meaning beyond just like 24 hour periods. First of all, in Hebrew, in the Hebrew thought, and in a lot of ancient thought, numbers are important. Numbers mean things. And so the number 7 in Hebrew thought was the number of completion. It was the number that was made up of 3, which is the perfect number because it's the last prime number, and then Christians then interpret this to be an indication of the Trinity. And the number 4, which means creation, and the idea of the 4 corners of the earth. Now, they didn't actually think the world was flat or square. They knew it was a sphere, but they did think about, you know, the 4 directions. So creation goes forth in 4 directions, and that can be spherical. And so what they thought was 7 is the perfect number of completion in an action between God and humans, or creation. This is why the week is 7 days, you know. This is, and so then you'll see, and we'll even read when the Bible says 7, it means perfect completion, and that number will come up again and again and again. So it indicates that there's a perfection and completion obtained in creation, and it also indicates the idea of order. 7 in the 7 periods of creation, whether they actually happen that way or not, is immaterial. What is the case is that everything is created according to its kind, right? And so the 7 periods are indicating God is creating an ordered creation. It's not just chaos. It's not just willy-nilly. It's not haphazard or slapdash. It is ordered. Everything fits into its proper category. Everything is properly divided and referenced to each other. And so this is what the 7 indicates. And what's really important is that the 7 indicates that the final being created is humanity, made in the image and likeness of God, which we'll get to in the next lecture. Now, another thing that's important is that God is creating from nothing. All right? Creation, this is called creatio ex nihilo. Now, there are some historical issues here that we're not going to get into, but the traditional interpretation in the monotheistic traditions of Judaism and Christianity has been that God didn't create from something. Now this, right, remember, goes back to what we mean by the word God. God doesn't coexist with matter. God is not a part of the universe. God doesn't order the universe as if it was some kind of mess and God, cleaned up the world. That's not how it works. God creates from nothing because God is being itself and thus donates being. And so that is what is happening. And that is what we need to see. We need to see that God created from nothing as a freely willed act. God did it in an orderly fashion. And God brought it to its completion. It's not lacking anything. Okay? So when the authors of the Genesis narrative, the creation narrative, and then the later interpreters of it throughout history, including the scriptural interpretation, but also beyond that, they're not thinking about science. They're not even thinking exactly about history. If they're thinking about history, it's like we said about the story aspect of reading the Bible. They're thinking about the intention of history. They're thinking about mythic intention. What is the identity of creation? What is the identity of the one who made it? And what are we in this? Where do we come from? Remember, it's about answering those big questions. That's what this is all about. And so what we find in the creation is Eden, paradise. The word paradise actually is a Babylonian term, paradiso, and it literally means garden. You think about a garden. A garden is not just a wild growing forest or flower bed. Well, I guess flower bed would be technically a garden. It's not something that is wild. A garden is ordered. We have the botanical gardens here in St. Louis, beautiful. And I love to see that because it's not, you can walk through areas that look like a forest, but it's not, it's ordered. There's something going on in it that bespeaks intention. It's not just growing wherever it grows, there's an intention behind it. And the intention behind Eden, in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, indicates the intention of the Creator when the Creator creates. And that is the original experience of the first humans. I'm sorry, this picture actually is kind of dumb. I should have picked one. It's from a long time ago, and I just haven't changed it out as I've changed the PowerPoints over the years. And so, not only am I not super keen on the dinosaur and all the, or maybe it's an ostrich, I don't know, but all the animals hanging out, but also Adam and Eve weren't white. They just weren't. They were almost certainly Given what we know about skin pigmentation and such, microevolution, they were almost certainly not white if they existed. I'll be honest, I don't know if Adam and Eve historically existed. Again, that's not an interesting question to me. I don't care, because I'm not worried about what Adam and Eve mean historically, except in as much as I'm worried about how they bespeak the intention of the Creator. That's what I'm interested in. I don't care if Adam and Eve historically existed. I want to know what this story means by Adam and Eve. When God creates everything and then at the end, as like a culmination, as an apex, as a crown, creates male and female in God's image and likeness, what does that mean? If Adam and Eve existed, sure, whatever, fine, I don't care. I want to know what it means that God, at the end of creating everything and calling it all good, created this one further step, male and female in God's image and likeness, and then called it very good. That's what the text says if you go back and look at it. After each day, God saw it was good. God saw it was good. God saw it was good. God creates humanity. God saw it was very good. And places them in this garden. And so what does the creation narrative tell us? That God's intention was originally for order, for harmony, for pleasure, and for relationality. And we're going to talk about what all that means next time. See you then.